the podcast of OA. Located deep within Sector 14845 and powered by the Emerald Light of Will, the podcast of OA is your guide to the Green Lantern universe. Hosted by Lantern Myron Rumsey, the podcast of OA begins now.
Hey, fellow Owens, you're tuned in to the podcast of OA, episode number 178. And we have a great episode for you lined up. Lots of great content. We're going to be talking about the future state announcement. We're going to be talking about HBO Max Green Lantern series. And we're going to be talking about Green Lantern Season 2, issue number 7, as well as some great listener feedback. I'm Myron Rumsey, joined by our good buddy Phil. Phil, I don't know about you, but I'm kind of jazzed about this one.
Yeah, man, this is going to be a good episode. I know when we were texting about it, and you brought up all the content we were going to have on tonight, and then I looked at the show notes. I was like, oh yeah, it's going to be a good time. Lots to talk about. And we're going to keep it family friendly too. Absolutely.
We're going to resist the urge to jump down in the sewer, but we've got things to talk about, and we've got some strong opinions about them. And while we're going to retain our professionalism, we've got a lot of things to talk about, and we have opinions, and not all of them are positive, but we'll see. Let's so before we jump into all that stuff, we do have a couple other things I want to talk about. One is you and I recently did an episode of the Lantern Cast, and we talked about it a little while ago. I think last episode we were talking about it was coming up, and we recorded it. It got released. It was a great conversation. You, myself, Mark Marble, and Chad Bokelman from the Lantern Cast. And we did this big, I think it ended up being like a 2.5 hour long episode, the case for Green Lantern. And we basically broke it down into where we felt DC had mishandled the property, and not just in print, but in media, and what we thought that Green Lantern offered that made it such a strong franchise, and what they could do to make it better. Gave them some suggestions. I don't know about you, but I thought it was a fantastic conversation.
Well, not only was it a great conversation that we had, and we had a good time doing it, and we put a lot of thought into it before we even decided to record it. All of us correlated and corresponded with supporting evidence and stuff like that. And we all interjected, and we all brought our points of view to the table. Not only was it well thought out, you'd think by some measure that with them being a prominent podcast about Green Lantern, and ourselves being a prominent podcast about Green Lantern, you'd think that somewhere out there, DC may have heard about it, or has listened to it, or somebody had mentioned to somebody higher up about it. I have a feeling that it's somewhere along the way, it's going to get back to them at some measure, and I hope it does some good. And I hope it raises some eyebrows, and I hope it opens up some eyes, and I hope somebody listened. I hope somebody heard it, because, we put a lot of faith into that episode, and, that was our final, hey, this is it. This is everything, the ball's in your court kind of thing. And, at the end of the day, on the other end, somebody needs to take an initiative to handle what the fandom says. Because I remember growing up, as well, and I'm sure you remember this too, the fans were always a really, really big part of DC and Marvel. And I don't know, I was having a conversation the other day with my friend Brian, or I think it was Brian, or it could have been somebody at work. And, they knew I was a DC fan. And I told them, I was like, look, I'll be honest with you. There was a time when I felt that DC and their creators cared about what their fans thought, same way with Marvel. I said, but now it just seems like both of those companies are just vying for a spot at the big media table, and they've forgotten what their fans mean. And unfortunately, that's kind of pushed me on the fringe to, hey, yeah, I have my characters I like Wonder Woman, Flash, and Green Lantern, and Superman, but I also do a lot of indie comics. And I'll be honest with you, a lot of the indie comics are, not only are they really good, but a lot of their writers and their artists and their presence, they really reach out to their fans. If you tag them on Twitter and you make comments to them, they'll respond back to you, or they'll DM you, or, they'll go out of their way to say, hey, I'm glad you like this, or I'm glad you like that. It's like, I don't know, I just hope they heard it, man. At the end of the day, I hope somebody was listening to it, and I hope somebody takes it to heart, because it was a nice, serious conversation. I mean, sure, it was fun, but it was very heartfelt for us to get all together at the same time and make our voices heard.
Right. And I hope that if people did listen to it, or they do still, that they don't take it personally, because there were some critical things that we discussed, and how we felt that DC had been mistreating Green Lantern and not doing good by the property. And that might be hard for people to hear whose job it is to do these things. But at the same time, you need critical feedback sometimes. And it almost seems like nowadays, people in those kind of positions almost get antagonistic about it. In other words, if you criticize something like Green Lantern or any fictional property or any kind of creative effort, then you're labeled toxic, or they throw some adjective label on you, and they don't engage in the honest feedback, and then you continue to lose customers that way. And I hope that DC and Warner Brothers understands, in the 4 people that were in that podcast, you probably had 4 of your biggest fans who want nothing more than to rally behind this franchise, and are upset and frustrated that our passion isn't being felt the same way as the people who were in charge of these things, whose jobs it is to be the custodians for those characters. And, I know for me personally, I don't think I've put as much effort into researching anything for a podcast episode as I did for that episode. I really spent I haven't even reviewed the last issue of the Green Lantern, because the time I was going to spend on that review, I spent prepping for that episode instead. And because I really did try to pour as much into it as I could, because I care deeply for it, and I hope that comes across. I hope it doesn't come across as bashing, because it's not meant to bash, even though it's critical. It's meant to have a dialogue.
I don't think. Well, I mean, from our perspective, we didn't. I don't think it was bashing by any means. But see, like, that's the problem with fandom nowadays. It's like you make one pronouncement, and from one person's viewpoint, you're bashing on something, but for another person's, it's a respectable criticism. You know what I mean? And that's where the touchiness lies with the fandom toxicity you're talking about. And unfortunately, Twitter's a cesspool of toxicity. If you're not careful about your commentary, you get railed hard. I mean, we've learned that over the course of the years now, like with Comicsgate, and a lot of these artists and creators that are out there that, there was just something with Tom King the other day, with that whole artist that he had or whatnot. And it's like, oh my gosh, I mean, people are just really, really relentless when it comes to it. But when it came to us getting all together, like you said, researching your stuff, I mean, people, if you could have saw Myron's bullet points on this on this template that we had, I mean, you would have thought this guy was writing a master's thesis. I mean, it was intense, and you made a lot of, you helped guide where we all needed to go to, and that's what was really, really crucial about it. But yeah, you're right, man. I mean, a lot of thought went into it, and I hope people give it a listen, and I hope people take it seriously enough so that, hey, it was just guys getting together and presenting a case study on why Green Lantern is relevant today. And this will go into what we're talking about with this whole future state stuff. I mean, it segs into that nonsense. But I mean, anyway, it was a good time, and I loved it. I had a great time doing it, and I love talking to Chad and Mark. I mean, they're 2 great guys, and and we all share one viewpoint, but we all also have different viewpoints. So it made it really interesting.
Very true. So that was episode number 411 of the Lantern Cast. I will link to that episode for folks if you're not already listening to their show. And I highly encourage people to subscribe to that show as well as ours, just because I think we offer similar yet contrasting viewpoints on things. I think it's great. I think that the Lantern Cast and the podcast of OA together really fill out a lot of different. I mean, we cover every corner when you think about it. They cover a lot of old stuff. We cover a lot of old stuff. We cover the new stuff. We have strong opinions in both sides of the fence, and I think that's great. I think it's very good for the fan base to hear a lot of different voices. So the other thing was, we're in October. It's Halloween season. Hopefully, you get to celebrate Halloween wherever you are. And there is a new big 80-page giant that just hit the stands this week. And I picked up a copy of it this morning on my lunch break. And it's DC, the Doomed, and the Darned. Because we're trying to be family friendly.
Family friendly. Bleep.
And there is a team up with Hal Jordan and the Demon in it. Now, Phil, did you read this issue at all?
No, I haven't got a chance to read it. That small little part. But I heard good things about it. I heard it was really interesting.
It was a $10 book, so I'm not sure whether this one story justifies a $10 book, because it was only 5 or 6 pages. Yeah, I think it's like 6 pages.
Yeah, it's real short. I know that.
Real short. Written by Kenny Porter, drawn by Riley Rossmo, who I think Riley did one of the variant covers for the current run of the Green Lantern. And I don't know as if I can say I would, if I had read this story beforehand, I don't think I would buy the book. Not that I'm trying to demean the story, but to me, it was just a typical, 2 characters that don't get along. Their egos get in the way. They're fighting a supernatural baddie and they get in each other's way. And then they finally decide to team up when they realize they can't defeat the bad guy on their own kind of story. You know, it's all the typical tropes of a classic team up. And the artwork, for my money, not the best artwork, in my opinion. Now, art is subjective, so maybe there are people that would like it, but for me, it was not winning me over. I'll put it to you that way.
Makes sense.
But
the cover was cool looking.
Oh yeah, the cover's really cool looking. I haven't had a chance to read the rest of the stories, and I'm Halloween is my favorite time of year, so. I always look forward to these stories, these books, because there's going to be at least 1 or 2 stories in here I know I'm going to like anyway. So, but if I was buying it just on the Green Lantern story, I wouldn't. So,
and Etrigan's a cool character. I mean, I like when he pops up. He's always cool. He's always fun.
Yeah, I like Etrigan. He's really cool. So, anyway, we've got a lot to talk about. Why don't we take a quick pause? And we can do the Know Your Core segment for this episode, and then we'll come back and we'll jump into the Green Lantern news. Normally we kind of put all of that in the beginning, but there's too much to talk about to make it a part of the intro. So,
all right, sounds good.
We'll be right back.
In brightest day, in blackest night, no evil shall escape my sight. Let those who worship evil's might beware my power, Green Lantern's light!
All right, fellow Owens, welcome back to another segment of Know Your Core. And this one is a grand one. That's right, we have the one and only Alan Ladd Wellington Scott. That's right, Alan Scott, the first actual Green Lantern, if you will. First appearance was All American Comics number 16 back in 38, if I'm not mistaken. He hails from Space Sector 2814. He was created by one Martin Nodell, and also Bill Finger is credited for some of that. He hails from the home planet of Earth, and unlike others who bear the name Green Lantern, Alan Scott's power does not come from the Guardians of the Universe, but from Starheart, a magical entity once imprisoned by the Guardians. The Starheart found its way to Earth, where in 1939, in the shape of a lantern, it saved Alan from a train wreck. At the lantern's mental direction, Alan fashioned a ring from it that allowed him to tap into the Starheart's great power. Perhaps influenced subconsciously by the Starheart's history, Alan adopted the identity of Green Lantern, the name of the great corps administered by the Guardians. And there you have it, fellow Owens. Another great addition to the Know Your Core segment.
Welcome back to the podcast of OA. So, Phil, you and I have got a couple of big pieces of Green Lantern news that have come out since the last episode, and one of those things just got announced today, the day we're recording on October 15th, and that is that DC has announced that in January and February, they are basically ceasing their normal book publication schedule and doing a 2-month-long event called Future State. And what we know about Future State is that, and I should say that we don't necessarily know this about Future State, but this is what everybody who's been following the whole 5G saga at DC Comics is saying. This is the content that was made during that window of time when the creative talent was working on the 5G books, and they were getting that stuff ready ahead of time, and then Dan Didio was let go from DC Comics and 5G was canceled. And so they have all this content. What do you do with it? So they're kind of packaging it up into this 2-month-long event, and it's a jump into the future. So this isn't the first time we've had DC do an event based on here's the future of the universe. I mean, you had DC 1 million back in the day and Future's End just not that long ago, really. So this isn't really something new. So whenever you see these things, it's hard to get excited about them because the future isn't written yet, to quote Marty McFly and Doc Brown.
Well, and there was also Justice League 3000. I don't know if you remember that one.
Oh, yeah. I forgot about that one. But
that was kind of cool for a little bit.
Right, yeah. They're neat. They're essentially Elseworlds where you tell a fictional future, and it's hard to put any real stock into it. So I find myself not always getting excited by those things. And I think the only thing that bothers me about this particular thing is that this was what DC's plan was, to replace the characters that we've been reading for years that are in essentially the first 4 generations of DC Comics. Each G was a generation. And this one, I don't know. I'm not thrilled, I'll be honest. But to get the information out there, and it is available on the blog of OA and elsewhere on comic book websites. But the only books that really pertain to Green Lantern that we can tell so far is Justice League, where Joe Mullane from Far Sector is the Green Lantern. And then there is a Green Lantern book. Now, these are both going to be oversized books, 2 issues each. And the Green Lantern book, the Central Power Battery's dead, and John Stewart and some of the other Green Lanterns that are left stranded on Mogo or Oa, they have to deal with a problem in another planet without the use of the power rings. And that book also is going to include stories about Guy and Jessica, and there's no mention at all about Hal, Kyle, or Simon in this. So it's interesting, I guess. The creative teams are interesting. There are a broad range of people that are both familiar to comic book readers as well as those that have worked on other kinds of properties. One of them being Jeffrey Thorne and Tom Rainey. They're working on The Lost Lanterns, which is the John Stewart story. The other story is called Tales of the Green Lantern Corps, and that's actually going to feature Ernie Altbacher, who wrote a number of the episodes of Green Lantern the Animated Series. And he's being teamed with Josie Campbell, Ryan Cady, Samri Basri, and Clayton Henry. The Justice League book, did I get the names for the Justice League book?
It's Josh Williamson and Robson Rocha.
Thank you. Coming in for the save. Yeah. Thanks, my friend.
Yeah. I knew Josh Williamson was coming off The Flash, and he was terrific on that book. I hated to see him go, but and I kind of figured, I was like, well, they must be putting him on a big book, because he's done great things with that character over there. And sure enough, I read up about it today earlier, and I was like, oh, there he is. He's going to be on Justice League. So yeah.
Now, the Green Lantern book shows John Stewart on the cover with a ring. Basically, the camera's kind of looking through a power ring that's laying on the ground, and you see 3 lanterns there. One is John Stewart, one is Kilowog, and one is Nort. So I don't know what to think about that. The impression I'm getting is that maybe Joe Mullane and Far Sector actually does take place in the future, even though it's not part of DC continuity, because if this is the future Justice League, she's there, and her ring is not based on the same technology as the other Green Lanterns. So it kind of makes sense that if the Central Power Battery is dead and the Green Lanterns are gone, Joe Mullane is the last Green Lantern, essentially, with a special power ring.
You know what else I was reading about? I didn't see, you know who else's name I didn't see anywhere on the list of the titles and writers? Robert Venditti.
Yes, and I had thought, from what I read, and again, we know it's rumor and speculation, but from what I read, he was one of the people that was writing some of that stuff. So I don't know whether maybe he was working on the books themselves that were going to be there was going to be a series of one-shot graphic novels, and one was going to be for each generation leading up to 5G. So maybe that's what he was working on. I don't know. As far as this whole thing, I mean, I realize this is a potential future, and it doesn't necessarily have any big leanings as to what's going on, but you tie this to some comments that Scott Snyder has said about death metal leading up to something big, and that the DC universe, I think, is going to change in some way. And it bothers me a little bit to think that what we're seeing here is what DC really thought fans were going to want to read. I make no excuses for the fact that I don't particularly care about Far Sector. I'm not going to read it. Maybe at some point when I find it in the dollar bin, and I know I will, I'll pick it up and read it. But I'm not interested enough to want to read anything about her. And I don't know. I look at DC Comics as, their job is to be the custodians of these properties, and there's a reason why these characters are iconic and have stood the test of time. And I kind of feel like, creators are kind of have to walk that line. You're trying to do something new and different with the characters and take them places where they haven't gone before, but at the same time, they need to stay true to what came before, because you're building on a legacy. These aren't your characters. They're the toys you get to play with for a while. And it just bothers me that there doesn't seem to be the same regard for these characters that I think fans have.
No, I mean, I'll be honest with you. I think it sucks. I mean, everybody was talking about it on Twitter today, and I had my few choice words about it, and and then I started reading into what was coming out and stuff like that. Nothing. I mean, I'll be honest with you. A lot of the characters that I read now, nothing interests me about what's coming out. The Aquaman title just doesn't look appealing to me. And there's going to be some blowback about the Wonder Woman stuff. I mean, with whatever they're doing with her character. I get it, but it goes back to what you have always stated. If you can't write about the characters you currently have, why do you have to keep making up different versions of the characters, or why do you have to keep making up different people? And some of these, I don't even know. Like, is it like? Are they Elseworld stories, or they're supposed to take place in the future, and this is where they're supposed to be, however many years from now that they're supposed to be.
Right.
But at the same time, these are timeless characters, so I guess these are different variations about what we writers think may have happened to them over the course of that frame. But a lot of the stuff doesn't add up to me.
Right.
Like the Wonder Woman stuff doesn't add up to me. The Flash, I don't know how many people are pissed off about, Wally West. People rail on that all the time about where's Wally West? Why don't they ever do him any justice? And the same thing's going to be for the Green Lantern stuff. Now we don't have Hal Jordan anymore. Come on. And Kyle again. Sure, we have a lot of Kyle fans that probably listen to our podcast, and there's a lot of Kyle fans out there, but Kyle gets no justice, like him or not. He's still more popular than Simon, He at least has some kind of credit where he could be in a book or something like that. But like now there's nothing. And Hal Jordan, that just baffles me. I made a comment to a person on Twitter about today. Where's Hal Jordan? And he responded, well, he's in the Green Lantern book now. Well, I already know that. I'm not ignorant. I'm talking about when this stuff comes out, so they're just not going to write about him anymore. I don't understand how you take a premier character like Hal Jordan, and I'm not saying this to be biased, but how do you take a premier character like that and just put him on the bench? It's like taking your star quarterback and benching him.
Right. People, I understand there are people who love Wally West, and I totally get it. But at the same time, Barry Allen and Hal Jordan, those are two characters that ushered in the Silver Age.
Yeah.
It was their recreations that helped lead into it. And we know that everybody gives Batman, Superman, and Wonder Woman all this stature because they're the Trinity. But the reason why they're the Trinity is because they've been the ones that have been here from the beginning, and they haven't changed.
Yeah,
and
that's very true.
I know you and I kind of like to make fun of Batman and so on, but I have to, say one thing using a Batman analogy is just because you put a cape and a cowl on a character doesn't make him Batman.
Mm-hmm. Agreed. And I rail on him all the time, and I understand that there's a fan base out there that adheres to him, and I understand why. I'm not totally. I mean, I get it. It's not like I'm not intelligent to that fact, but I'm like that fan. They may like Batman, but that fan may not like Green Lantern. So it's tit for tat when it comes to who you like and who you don't. It's just one of the characters you always attach yourself to. It's like Marvel stuff. I don't really read a lot of Marvel stuff because I've never really connected with a lot of their characters. I've more connected with DC stuff over the course of the years.
Well, and one thing that I want to comment on too is DC put out this image of DC Future State, and it has all of these different characters on it. There are 3 Supermen, 2 Batmen, and 2 Wonder Women.
The one looks like the Kingdom Come emblem on the front.
Right, you're right. And then you've got Harley Quinn, who seems to be unchanged, and you've got Catwoman, who's a slight tweak to the costume, and then you've got Zatanna, who looks very much unchanged. It looks like Grifter in the background. There's one character that people were kind of trying to figure out who they were, and that's if you look just above the DC logo, there's a gentleman of color wearing green and red pants, and he's got a gun, and he's got kind of like a yellow, I don't want to say lightsaber, but that's what it looks like. Only not a lightsaber from Star Wars, but a saber made out of light.
He looks like somebody out of Mad Max.
Well, he does, and that's Jon Stewart.
I know. You were telling me that off mic, and I was like, "What?"
The writer of that story, the whole the Last Lanterns story, Jeffrey Thorne, said it on Twitter that this is going to be this is Jon Stewart. You've never seen Jon Stewart like this. I can't believe they're letting us do it. What they're letting us do. So I don't know. Part of me is torn because I feel like I need to read the Green Lantern book. I'm not picking up the Justice League book. That's for darn sure. But I almost feel compelled to pick up the Green Lantern book just to see what's in there because we haven't gotten the complete solicitations yet. We've only gotten just kind of little teases. So it depends. I'm torn because part of me wants to read it as a Green Lantern fan and I want to be able to review it. The other side of me is I don't want to endorse it by spending my money on it.
Yeah, I'm the same way. I don't know. Like I said, I think it's damage control. I mean, that's what it should have been called. Not DC Future State, DC Damage Control. I don't know. I mean, there's going to be fans that like it, and there's going to be fans that don't. I mean, it's just another event that these companies push, and put out there for their fan base. But I can't believe that in all the creative talent that they have in those buildings, that this is what they came up with. It's like,
to me, it's like this is what you envisioned 5G was going to be, man.
I mean, right? I mean, death metal has been, I'm kind of touch and go with death metal. I like it, but I don't like it. It's cool, but there's times when it's like, well, I don't know if I really care for it that much or not. But after that, you have this. And this is your main event going for 2 months. It's like, okay, well, whatever. I mean, I'm more interested in what's going to happen on the other end of that, So if this is going to be going for 2 months, what the hell are they going to do with it after that?
Yeah, I'm more interested in finding out what happens in March than I am what happens in January and February. And I'm the same as you on death metal. I've been trying to keep up with it, but gosh darn it, I can't keep up with everything that's going on. So I've kind of almost given up. I've been flipping through the issues, but I can't get myself entrenched in the story.
There's some that are really cool. I read the one by Josh Williamson, and he did the speed metal one, and it was really, really cool. But I like him as a writer, so I kind of figured it was gonna be a great book. But it was mainly about the Flash, and it had Wally West in it. But I read Death Metal 4 that came out this week, and again, it's really trippy. I have a hard time finding out where this is fitting into DC continuity, but I guess this is I don't know. I guess this is the end all towards where they're heading into when it segs in the future state. But I just don't know how that seg is going to take place. So if this is going on now, in DC continuity, then whatever happens at the end of Death Metal, that means Future State is like the regurgitation of it. Okay, so and then what? It's supposed to return to the status quo afterwards. See, that's where it gets tricky for me, because it's like, okay, you got an event, that's one thing, but coming off of one big event and then coming out of another big event are two very different things on how you're going to produce your content moving forward. So Future State is one thing. So do they return to the status quo afterwards, or is Future State one of those things where it's like, we're just going to throw a blank at the wall and see what sticks, and then we'll revisit it later on. But again, I don't know. But as well as I do that they write these titles in advance, so they probably already have a plan for going beyond Future State by now, I'm sure.
I would hope. I don't know what, nobody knows what they've got in store except for the people that are in charge. I'm gonna be interested to see what happens in March. I really am. Jim Lee is adamant in saying there's no relaunch and yada yada yada, but I don't know if I put any faith in that, to be honest.
No. Like I said, I'm not a fan of this. I think it sucks. I think, there's been big events that DC's done that I think have been way better than this, and I can't believe that this is the kind of stuff that they come up with. But whatever. Maybe it's a way for writers to, I don't know, branch out and write different versions of characters that have been written ad nauseum over the years that needed a massive change up, like the Jon Stewart aspect. I get it. Maybe somebody wants to see a different incarnation of Jon Stewart. I don't know. I'm big into that too, but you also can already get that. We've seen it before in the past. Go read some of the older books. It's happened before. Why do we need another retelling of it? Especially when now he's not going to be on Justice League anymore. That's one thing. But then you got Joe Moline, who I dropped Far Sector. I haven't read it in quite a long time now, and now she's going to be one of the the members of the Justice League. Okay, well at some level that kind of makes sense because it's another female on there, but at the same time, I mean, like you said, you have your Trinity, and outside of that, what do you have? They keep changing their group up, just kind of like the Avengers does a lot. They keep changing their tier characters that are involved with the Justice League, and I miss Hal being on that team.
Yeah.
I miss Aquaman being around a lot, but we don't get that anymore. So okay.
I used to love back in the Satellite era, reading the whole things where Hawkman and Aquaman. I got Aquaman in the brain now. Hawkman and Green Arrow would get into a lot of arguments, and it was just interesting. I don't know. I just loved that era, and I miss the stable roster of characters that are so iconic. I want to read that stuff, and I know I can go back and read the back issues, but I want to read new stuff with those characters.
Yeah, I do too.
Anyway, the other big news is that we finally got some information about HBO Max's Green Lantern series, and it was not at all what I was expecting. I personally, I had in my mind, I thought, boy, if I was in charge of this show, I would be, because based on what they've telling us, it's going to span generations. My thought was, okay, one generation would be Sinestro and Abin Sur in Sinestro's early day in the Corps, when he's being trained by Abin Sur, and you see the very I don't want to say altruistic, but the good guy version of Sinestro, who's still got all of his values in check, and he's not the Sinestro we know. And then the modern time set with Sinestro, just as he's about to launch the Sinestro Corps War. That's what I visioned in my head. And Sinestro would be the linchpin between the two halves. And that's the story I wanted to see. And what we're getting is a show that's featuring Alan Scott, which I think is a great thing. But I'm not sure how they're going to tie that to the Silver Age version of Green Lantern, the more modern storytelling, where you've got Guy Gardner and Simon Baz and Jessica Cruz.
Yeah, I mean, I was a little confused by the fact that they threw Alan Scott in there, because that's like, I mean, Alan Scott predated the Green Lantern stuff, predated the Green Lantern Corps per se. So how does he fit into that role?
Right.
You know what I mean? Like, so the recent parts he's been written about, it's been with the Justice Society or Earth 2, Alan Scott, which is a different kind of character. But like, I don't see how he fits in with the rest of. I haven't seen him interact with Guy. I don't see how he's going to interact with Simon and Jessica, because those are two new Lanterns anyway. It's almost like there's this big generational gap between those two. I'd seen him more having an interaction with Hal, maybe John Stewart, but I don't know. It was kind of, I was taken aback by the fact that Alan. I mean, I'm glad. Don't get me wrong, but I just don't know how they're gonna. I don't know how they're gonna tell that story, unless they're rebranding the character to be the beginning of the Green Lantern mythology. I mean, that could be what they're doing with him. I mean, because in a sense he did spearhead it, but I don't know. I mean, I don't know. I'm confused by it just as much as you are.
What I don't know is if they're going to interact with each other, because again, they talked about a show that would span generations. So perhaps it's in two different time frames.
And that could be too. And maybe they're telling stories from two different perspectives, like, you know, flashbacks, sequences or whatnot, lore. I mean, there is a lore with Green Lantern, so I mean, maybe that's what it's going to be a part of. That's a good point. I didn't think about that.
And we know Greg Berlanti's involved with it, who did the Arrowverse, and we know how they love flashbacks.
Yeah, see, so, you know, and you know, and I have a lot of faith in Greg Berlanti. He's done great work, you know. I mean, the Arrowverse was cool. You know, what started out as Arrow became the Arrowverse, you know, and I mean, he did wonders with that series, you know, for that character and for that fan base. You know, let's hope he can still build upon that with the Green Lantern clique. You know, we're a different kind of beast than it comes to Green Arrow. So, you know, we stay true to form, and I don't think there's going to be a lot of people out there that's going to want a nuanced approach to Green Lantern, because they're going to want to see a lot of like your Green Lantern Corps, your Guardians. You know, they're going to want to see Oa. You know, they're going to want to see big things, maybe like Mogo. You know, stuff like that. Mm-hmm. I doubt we'll see it, but you know, only time will tell.
Right.
Well, at least we got some news. You know, that's the main thing.
True. And they did mention that they did name drop Kilowog, and we already kind of knew about Sinestro. There was no mention of Hal, John, or Kyle. And what that leads me to think is that, are they going to try to make the TV show connect to the movie we're supposed to be getting somewhere down the road? And that's why you're not using those characters, because they exist in the same universe, and they don't want to have those characters on the TV show because they're going to be on the big screen. I'm not sure I'm a big fan of that, to be honest, just because we don't know when a movie's going to get made. And considering the state of the film industry, I'm not sure if it's going to get made, regardless of whether there's a script or anything. So to me, if you're putting all your eggs in a basket that's being propped up by Guy Gardner, Simon Baz, and Jessica Cruz, I don't know.
Well, you know what I'm going to say. I mean,
right.
I'm all for the Guy Gardner aspect. I think it's going to be interesting to have a guy like, I mean, I hope they get some really, really pompous, you know, windbag that plays him. You know, I hope they cast him really well. You know, Jessica, I'm looking forward to. Simon, whatever. You know, it is what it is. Kilowog's going to be cool. I mean, but I hope they do him. I hope they do him better than what they did him in the original movie. He wasn't bad, but I feel like they could do better. You know.
Yeah, I'm honestly not thrilled by any of it, to be completely honest.
No, that's fine.
The showrunner is Seth Grahame-Smith. He was the screenwriter on the Lego Batman movie, and he is co-writing the initial episode with Mark Guggenheim. And Mark Guggenheim, obviously, he worked with Berlanti in the Arrowverse. He and Berlanti were also co-writers on the first script for the 2011 Green Lantern film. And I know sometimes that leaves a bad taste in people's mouths, but realize they only wrote the first draft. And the first draft was almost nothing like what came out on film.
Well, and times change. That was a long time ago. You know, you gotta just. I think we've got enough distance between that.
I'd like to think that, but I guess I don't have any confidence, considering that DC apparently hasn't gotten over it, or Warner Brothers, I should say, hasn't gotten over it. What I worry about is we don't know when we're going to get a film, and is Warner Brothers going to look at the how this TV show performs to determine whether or not they're going to make a movie?
Well, I mean, considering that we don't even know what the state of the theater business is going to be. I mean, you even said it. Like, I mean, when's the next time we're going to see a movie again in theaters? And let alone they keep pushing stuff back time and time again. I mean, Tenet's going to be coming out for digital release. Wonder Woman's going to be out for digital release, I bet. You know, they're going to push this content. It's not going to be seen on the big screen. You know, so they're going to push it all digital. Well, what happens on the other end of that? I mean, do theaters bounce back? I would venture to guess that you can't kill off the movie industry, but if it's going to be done, then digital streaming is going to do it. So, I mean, that could change things going into next year with HBO Max when they launch the Snyder Cut. I mean, you know, or if Wonder Woman 84 gets released on whatever platform it gets released on, you know, that could change how movie viewers go and see their movies or don't go and see their movies. So trial running a show like this, whenever it does get released next year, could be a pivotal point for revisiting how the movie theater business is doing if there's an after COVID. I mean, I say that if there's an after COVID because you don't know when this is going to end. I mean, I don't see this ending anytime soon, and I don't see people gathering in theaters like they used to for quite some time.
Right. You know, you wonder if the theater movie model is going to change and we're going to move away from having movie theaters and more streaming services. You know, you're seeing that now, as you've mentioned, where some of these big name movies are skipping the theater and going to their the streaming services directly. You know, you saw the whole thing with Disney Mulan, and you spent extra money and got to see Mulan early, or you could wait until it just became part of the digital platform. You know, does that become that content? And who knows? But I guess my thing is if I'm going to hinge a movie on the performance of the TV show, that's not the cast of characters I would go with.
Me too. Me as well.
You know, as we commented on the Lantern cast, if you can have 2 Supermen and 2 Batmen and 2 Flashes and 2 Cyborgs, then you can have 2 different versions of the same Green Lantern. Same difference.
Yeah, I agree.
But if supposedly the show's going to go into production next year. Don't know the exact timeline for release. I'm trying to remain optimistic for it. I'm excited to see any kind of Green Lantern show on TV, to be honest. But I'm disappointed in the direction they seem to be going in, unless this is all going to be connected together. And maybe you, to promote the movie, have the cast from the movie to be on the TV show.
Well, it's also worth noting that with the Snyder Cut, you never know what can happen with the Snyder Cut. You know, there might be something in there that might be something in there that dictates why this is being done the way it's being done. You know what I mean? Like how John O'Connor. Now, I'm not saying all 3 of those guys are going to show up in the Snyder Cut, but there could be something in that Snyder Cut that alludes to just why some of these characters aren't going to be included on the series. You never know.
Possibly. I mean, there's rumors about Snyder doing more stuff for Warner Brothers after, depending on how the Snyder Cut goes. So everything is so up in the air. It's hard to know where things are going to go. I think we're in just an odd time right now where there's so many things in flux and so many unknowns that it creates anxiety. And I'll be very honest. I have been struggling for a while with I'm trying to maintain my positivity. When I was preparing for the Lantern cast, it kind of all hit me a little bit about how I feel about this franchise and how I feel that it's not getting what it deserves. And I feel, I don't want to say let down by it, but
defeated, man.
A little defeated. I think that's a good choice of words. And I've struggled a little bit. I'm like, you know, I don't know. It's been hard to maintain a positive attitude. I have said from the very beginning that my whole goal in doing some of this stuff was I wanted to be a good ambassador for the franchise, but it's hard. It's getting harder and harder for me to do that. I try to put a positive spin on things when I can, but I'm finding myself less and less positive to the point at which I don't want to become the negative voice. I don't want to be the person that comes off like I'm bashing stuff or to sound like a toxic fan. But sometimes I feel like DC and Warner Brothers is not giving me any option. They're not giving me what I need as a fan to feel positive about it. And at some point, do I just walk away from it? I don't know.
No way. Can't walk away. We can't let our fans down that listen to our podcast. And then we can't let Chad and Mark down because, we have to have the parent podcast with Lantern Cast involved. So I guess what we should probably do is, because I know I'm a negative Nancy sometimes, and I'll own up to it. I'm okay with it. But at the same time, my thoughts align a lot with yours too, because I feel like that the Green Lantern stuff gets crapped on all the time, but we also have to remember this isn't the heyday like it used to be, especially back when we had all those books that were coming out hand over fist, and especially the excellent Larfleeze book. I mean, I think I'm the only one that liked that. Matter of fact, if there's any listeners out there, write in sometime. Just let me know if I'm the only one that liked that book, because I genuinely really liked the Larfleeze book. But we're probably not going to get that same swath of titles ever again. But I'm the first one to say all I want is a Green Lantern Corps book. That's it. As a matter of fact, you can put all the characters in there. All the characters in there, all of them. I'll even take Simon, for crying out loud. Put him in there too, and and tell me and give me a different story. Bi-monthly, you could easily come up with a gajillion stories with how many lanterns you have, and you can do pair-ups. You can do teams. You can do, this lantern group's over in this sector, and they're taking care of this crisis. Yeah, I mean, there's so much you can do with a Green Lantern Corps book, with all the lanterns you have, and coming out with two books a month, done. I'd write it. But I would just take that. I mean, I'm gonna wish I wish Hal Jordan had his own title. I wish. This and I wish that, but you know what? I would just take a full-blown Green Lantern Corps book and give me all of them, and just give me a couple books a month. I'll be fine. I'll ride that out until they come up with another plan or it gets canceled because they want to come out with Future State Part 2.
I was describing Future State as the love child between Convergence and Future's End.
Oh my God, man! When you sent me that text, I about busted out laughing. It was great. I mean, you were so spot on with that analogy. I loved it.
Well, anyway, my friends, let's take a pause, and we've got a comic book to talk about, and maybe that'll put us in a better frame of mind.
All right, sounds great.
All right.
What up, dweebs? This is Guy Gardner. You're listening to the podcast of OA.
Well, my friend, we have a new issue of the Green Lantern series by Liam Sharp and Grant Morrison to talk about. And boy, we've talked about things being Grant Morrison-y, and this is probably the most Grant Morrison-y book of the series so far. I got to find out what you thought about it before I make any comments.
Dude, it was insane. I mean, it was like being, I don't know if I can say that out loud, but it's like being on a high, like tripping out, like you're just in some kind of different universe. But at the same time, it's Halloween month, so it's kind of gory. It's kind of got that gore feeling to it, and this really, really dark, grotesque kind of haunted, eerie aura that existed around every single page. How's that?
That's a good way to look at it. It definitely had the scare factor, gore factor. I mean, in this issue wasn't so much about Hal and the Green Lanterns. This was really an issue that spotlighted Weapon Year 666, which is the Antimatter Universe version of Hal. It was really kind of a character piece about him. And what was interesting is because this entire story takes place in the Antimatter Universe, when the Positive Matter Universe characters talk, they literally talk backwards, which made it a bit of a challenge to read the issue. But the story also unfolds backwards.
Right.
So
The narrative was tough. I'll be honest with Green Lantern fans out there. If they're going to read this, they're going to have to read it twice because it's a little tough to follow because of the way the narrative is written. But see, that's Morrison though, man. He likes changing the scope of comic book writing, and he pretty much took it to the next level in this book.
yeah, I mean, I thought it was very creative. Maybe it was a little too cute for its own good. And I'm sure some people will look at that way. I thought Liam Sharp, they've kind of gone with this painted style, and his artwork really shines in this issue. I will say I don't think this book reads well if you're reading it digitally with a guided view, simply because there are things that Liam Sharp did with the panel. Like there's some pages where there's 16 sub panels to the page. There's 16 panels on the page. But some of the panels are just the artwork. It's almost like I don't know how to describe it. Like the background is there as if it was a full page drawing, but yet it's still broken up into panels. And sometimes those panels are close-ups of things, if that makes sense.
Mm-hmm. Kind of like a blend. It's like a blended panel. Yeah,
that's probably a good way to look at it. And I think that makes it a challenge because I read it initially digitally, and whenever I do digital, I always do guided view, and I was like, "What the heck's this?" Because it's just a panel with some stars in it. So I struggled a little bit at first, and then when I got my print copy, it was much easier. But I also found that reading the story backwards did make it a bit of a challenge from a reading perspective. And I found myself in trying to prep for the review and writing for the issue. I found myself kind of, I don't want to say diagramming the issue, but kind of laying out the timeline so I could see when I got done, look at my notes backwards to read the story in chronological order, how things were happening. And it's really kind of fascinating because it starts out with Weaponeer 666 or Quala, which is Qua with Hal backwards, being tortured by his masters for the destruction of the Lightning Forge. And we don't know what happened, how it got destroyed, because the last we saw, Hal and the Green Lanterns, after Hal came back from the dead, they were heading off to the antimatter universe to deal with the Quamen. And so we had no idea how we got to this point. And of course, that's because in this story, we're flowing backwards in time. And then it goes back an hour earlier, and we see Quala holding part of a person in his arms. And it's what I loved about that panel is, I mean, it was grotesque, that's for sure. But what I thought was so fascinating was that you could tell who it was if you really paid attention to the face.
The guy he's holding?
Yeah.
I can't tell who it is.
It's Sinestro.
No kidding.
Yes. So Sinestro is dead, and he's in Quala's arms as Weaponeer 800, which is kind of looks like Trilla True in a way, only as a Weaponeer. She confronts him about the destruction of the Lightning Forge, and that she's basically letting this version of Hal know that she let Sinestro walk. She goes, "I let him walk into the explosion," which him is Sinestro. But yeah, if you look at the face, you can really see the subtlety of the face that it's Sinestro. And then Hal, their version of Hal says, you think I didn't already know? That kind of thing. And the Qua Masters are requesting his presence. Then it jumps just 10 minutes earlier, and you see Hal confronting his antimatter universe self. And again, it's the whole reverse dialogue thing. And he lets the antimatter version of Hal live, saying that killing you would be showing you mercy, and I'm not going to show you mercy. And Sinestro says something about, well, he didn't do what you said he was going to do. He's gone, and he didn't do what you thought he was going to do. He didn't do what you wanted. He didn't destroy the Lightning Forge. It's still intact.
Right.
And so this is before it's blown up. We don't see the moment where it blows up, but that's the last time we kind of see Sinestro alive. And then it goes again a little bit earlier, 8 minutes, and you see Hal arriving to meet up with his antimatter universe self. And you discover that the whole reason why the Quaman version of Hal, Quala, attacked Sector General was to lure Hal to come and attack them.
Interesting. I didn't pick up on that. This one was convoluted, man. I'm not going to lie. It was a little tough for me to get through it.
He basically brought Hal there to destroy the Lightning Forge.
Huh.
So again, we jump 15 minutes before that, and you see Hal and the Green Lantern Corps are just starting to arrive above the Cord homeworld to start their fight. And Trilla True gets into this really neat fight with her version of herself, because if you recall, the last time they saw each other, the antimatter version of Trilla chopped off Trilla True's arm.
Right.
So
and
she
you see the metal arm on her right there.
Yeah. So she kind of gets her payback on Weaponeer 800, which I thought was really cool. And it was a neat scene where they can't touch each other, or they're going to blow up, because you get the matter version versus the antimatter version. And basically Trilla True just creates a bunch of things that all goes after Weaponeer 600 or 800, excuse me, and really just does a number on her, which I thought was kind of cool.
Yeah, it was cool. And then you got on the next page, the guy with the volcano head. What's his name?
Volk.
Volk, that's right. He looks cool as always.
Yeah, and you kind of see him fighting his counterpart as well. And then there's this really neat panel where you see Hal saying, "I got this," and again it's backwards. And he's like the left panel, and the right panel is the the antimatter universe Hal. And so their faces line up, which is cool. And you have Sinestro pleading with the antimatter version of Hal, saying, don't do it. So we don't know exactly what's going on yet, but he's begging the antimatter version of Hal not to do it. It doesn't have to end this way, he says. And that version of Hal says, "I was made for war. Nothing can change the rules." And again, we still don't know everything that's going on yet. We go back a little bit further, and you see that the Green Lantern Corps is approaching, and that the antimatter version of Hal is getting a tribute from Earth, which is interesting because it looks like a bunch of different power batteries. Not sure what that's all about.
That's kind of an interesting take on that. Who's that one to the left of that? That one lady with the big hair.
I'm not sure. I haven't. I've got to do some research on that one yet. But interesting. I'm not sure what it's about. But again, he talks about I was raised on Earth, and he talks about the tribute is pitiful, and I go through the motions without enthusiasm, and basically everything's coming to a head at this point, and then we jump further back in the past, and you find out that the mirror universe version of Hal and Sinestro are lovers.
I know, that was really odd. It took me a minute to really, really get past those few pages. I was like, okay, well, this is different.
and this isn't our version of Sinestro. We got to remember, it's not our version of Sinestro. It's the antimatter universe version of Sinestro. Mm-hmm. But it's interesting because they were hunting Sinestro, and so the antimatter lanterns think that their version of Hal is torturing Sinestro, when really it's just so they can get together.
Right. Okay. Now it comes full circle now.
Right. And so then they're talking about this whole thing, and basically their version of Hal says, our ability to endure pain is the measure of our strength. And that version of Sinestro is trying to talk him into leaving and going to the positive matter universe where it can be different. And Sinestro says, this should never have happened between us. We both know love only exists in this world to be destroyed. Haven't you risked enough already? And then, I don't know, it's interesting. We find out that in the end, when it jumps to the final section of the story, that basically Quala, or the antimatter version of Hal, his ultimate goal is to strike down his masters. Mm-hmm. But to quote what he says, ultimate pain you have to undergo ultimate pain to get ultimate strength. So he feels like the only way he can defeat his masters is to feel the most pain he can possibly feel. That includes the murder of love and bearing the ultimate agony. So it sounds like, the way I'm reading this story, is that the antimatter version of Hal is using Sinestro and sacrifices Sinestro willingly so that he can feel the loss of love and feel the pain of that agony, and then the torture of his masters to give him the strength he's going to need to ultimately turn on them.
Oh, that makes sense.
Which I thought was really interesting, but again, you don't find it out until the end. And it isn't explicitly said. It's kind of just left to you to figure it out. But he basically just says, my decision is made. Pain makes us strong. Our ability to endure pain is the source of all our power. Pain drives our weaponry. In pain, our strength is honed. Ultimate pain is ultimate strength. The strength to one day strike down the Quamasters.
Well, and he goes on, in the name of this dream, I would sacrifice everything.
Which is exactly what he does. As the story unfolds backwards, we discover he sacrificed everything to get to that point that we see him at the beginning of the issue.
And what's really funny is, like, when you get to that last page, at the bottom right, it says it begins. And then on the next page, of course, you got the little Green Lantern emblem with Grant Morrison script and Liam Sharp. Conversely, when you get to the beginning of the comic, it says the end.
yeah, which I thought was really clever.
I mean, it's a different way to write a book. It's almost like you're reading an anime book, from right to left instead of left to right.
Yeah. But it's almost like you have to take each section and read it left to right, but then put them in order. It's right. Interesting. But I thought it was a very interesting book, very strong character piece for this version of Hal, which up till now had been kind of seen as this one-dimensional character.
Yeah, it did add a lot of depth to it. That's for sure. That artwork is crazy in this book.
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
I mean, they went all out. I mean, just the color. Olaf on his colors. I mean, there should be a law against certain art like this, because it's like, how do you even comprehend being this kind of artist? It's like I'd like to live inside Sharp's brain for a little bit, just to see what he's seeing in his head. because I mean we've always talked about this, and I've said it time and time again. It's like each issue that comes out, I mean, it just seems like his art just gets progressively better and better and better, but by different standards. I mean, he's got such a malleable pen. Of course, a lot of it looks like some of this was digital, and some of it was paper. Maybe.
Yeah, I agree. It could very.
I think
well
it was a mix between the two. Yeah,
mixed media. It just very clever issue. A little hard to unpack. Totally get it, and I understand. The people that want to just read space adventure, and this is not that.
No, it's not that at all.
Yeah, it's definitely more challenging.
It is, but we talked about this back at the very first issue before the Grant Morrison run started, and we talked about how it's not going to be for the everyday Green Lantern fan, to grasp how Grant Morrison's going to write that character. Because anytime you read about it, it's always a Morrison-esque style. Because he has his own style and how he does stuff. And this is no different. He probably upped the ante for himself in this. I can't even imagine how it's going to be with the last few issues that we're going to have, on how much grander he's going to get on the scope since what he's written here.
Yeah. I don't know what to expect.
Nobody does.
So I think this issue, for people that have been struggling with this book, I think this issue might put them over the edge.
I would agree with that.
I think it was easier to read than the issue that had the very, really awful dialogue. I think it was easier to read than that, but it still was almost like a puzzle you had to spend the time to unravel.
Mm-hmm. That's a good way to put it. Because it was. I mean, who knew it was going to be a story that was written in the manner that it was written in? Yeah, I agree.
All right, good sir. Well, we have a lot of listener feedback, so why don't we take a quick pause? I know I need to wet my whistle, and we'll come back and we'll share some comments from our listeners.
Sounds like a plan.
This is Salak, Green Lantern of Sector 1418, and you are receiving the podcast of Oa.
The podcast of Oa.
All right, guys, welcome back. Well, we have a lot of listener feedback to get through tonight, so I'm going to start it off for us. And this one's from Corey. Once again, Corey says, "Hey, fellas, I appreciate you guys reading my emails last episode. No problem. And Phil, I appreciate your offer to send me the digital files of issues 1 through 47 of Volume 3. Reading digitally has been my format of choice for a while now, but I had a novel idea about finding the first 47 issues of Volume 3. Checked my local comic book stores. To my surprise, I went to 3 different stores and found more than half of the issues fairly inexpensive, most ranging from $1.25 to $3. I filled in the rest by searching online, but I was able to easily find all of the floppies. Go you. I have not really been in a comic book store lately, and not just because of COVID. 2 of my local stores I went to were kind of messy, like a comic book hoarder's house. But it was fun rifling through back issues like I used to when I was a kid. That makes it all the while. While I was there, I also picked up issues 2 through 8 of the Green Lantern Corps Quarterly. I only have number 1 from that series, and it was one of my favorite books when I was a child. Jack T. Chance's origin story always stuck with me because it was a great example of the eclectic members that make up the Corps. I cracked open one of the books when I got home, and wham! The smell of these old books is something I haven't experienced in a while. You can't get that digitally. No, sir, you can't. And reading the high-gloss trades don't have that scent. A rush of memories, and I'm 11 years old again, in my parents' old house, reading comic books and putting off homework. Good times. Really looking forward to experiencing this Gerard Jones run. Keep your power rings charged, boys, and keep up the great work. Well, that was great. I mean, I love hearing from him because he sends long emails, and he's always verbal. He always has a lot to say. But I'll tell you what, man, that was a great one to read because he's right. I mean, you can't get that scent in a digital, and it didn't really hit me until he said it. That's what I miss when I read my digital stuff. Even when you go and you pick up the new floppies, every week or whatever the case may be at your local comic book store, it doesn't have the same scent as it does when you rifle through those old bins, man. It just doesn't. Spot on. Yeah,
it's a multi-sensory experience. It's the feel of the book, the smell of the book. There's still something that takes you right back to being a kid again, to just pick up the actual physical copies.
I mean, they should make car air fresheners or air fresheners for your home, the old comic book scent. They should market that. And you can put that in your office.
They could have like a golden age, a silver age.
Right. Oh, man, Corey, that made my night, man. Thanks for that one. That was good. That was great. Loved reading.
So the next message we got is from Sam, and Sam says, "Hello, I was listening to episode 164, and you spoke with someone from the Emerald Echo podcast. Is that an ongoing podcast with its own RSS feed, or is it part of the Tales of the DC Multiverse podcast with their episodes mixed in with others? Thanks for any info you can provide." And yeah, that's our friend Donnie that we had on during the You Are the Core segment, one of those segments. And Emerald Echo is part of the DC Multiverse podcast. It's Tales from the DC Multiverse, the podcast. And they've had, I want to say 5 or 6 Green Lantern, Emerald Echo shows. And Phil, didn't you do one of those?
Yeah, I think I was on there one time with them guys. Yeah, I'm not sure. I really don't remember which one it was, but they did a John Stewart spotlight episode. They did a Hal Jordan spotlight episode. But they've also done some Superman stuff. I mean, they've even done a Masters of the Universe thing.
You were on for the Simon Baz spotlight, right?
I was. I'm such a secret fan of Simon Baz. But it's also worth noting that podcast that they do is on Podbean. I don't think they have an RSS feed, if I'm not mistaken. I don't know if they do or not. You can reach me on Twitter. Reach out to me, and I'll put you in contact with them, and you can ask them.
And I'll go and look at their website. If there's an RSS feed, I'll put it in the show links, so that it's there. And if not, I'll still put a link to where their Podbean hosting site is, so that you can find the episodes. And I think they're on iTunes. I'm pretty sure.
Yeah. Okay.
And speaking of iTunes, if any of our listeners are listening to us using iTunes, if you could take time out to go and do a review, that would be fantastic. One of the ways that people find us is, even though there's all these different aggregators out there, we're on Spreaker and Stitcher and SoundCloud and Amazon Music now and so on, but people tend to find us more through iTunes, and the number of reviews that a podcast gets determines where it shows up when people search on the topic. So if you go to iTunes and you go to the store and you search on Green Lantern, the more reviews we have and comments we have from listeners, the more likely that is to be one of the first podcasts that they see listed. And surprisingly, even though there's just us and the Lantern Cast, we don't come up in the top, because there are other shows that have more comments that may have done a Green Lantern episode, and so they end up searching up in higher than we do, which is unfortunate for both of our shows.
That's right. Do your civic duty as a member, a fellow Owen and a core member, to write a positive review.
All right.
All right. So next one is to you, Myron, and this is from Kyle Rayner. Well, it's Kyle, but it might be Kyle Rayner.
Yeah, it could be.
I'm a long-time subscriber of your podcast, and I go to your website for all GL news. Thank you for putting the time in to keep these platforms going. Question: I read your GL news back in March about how many issues GL Season 2 is doing this year. Has there been any updates since the fallout of Didio and 5G plans? I think last I read, Liam leaked 12 issues only. I'll let you answer that. Go ahead.
So originally, Kyle, the series was to be broken up into two 12-issue seasons. Mm-hmm. And Season 2 was also going to be 12 issues. Then when we started hearing about 5Gs, DC reduced the issues down to 8 to make it fit with their timeline for 5G. When that all kind of fell aside, Jim Lee went back to Liam and Grant and had them bump it back up to 12 issues. So it is 12 issues only. So we just had issue 8, so we've got 4 more to go, which puts us in, let's see, October, it was this month, November, December, January. So it's interesting is that issue 12 will end in February if they don't cease publication for January and February for Future State.
That's right, Kyle. Your future lies with Future State.
All right. Our next one is from our good friend Daniel from the Facebook group we have. And Daniel, as we've pointed out before, does a Green Lantern book club. And they just did a event where they use Facebook Live and they get in, they chat, and they talk to each other and talk about different books. And they just got done doing Green Lantern Earth 1 Volume 1, which is really cool. So anyway, Daniel says, thanks for the promotion and all the support for the Green Lantern Book Club. It's really a great community that you guys have created, and I'm glad I can contribute a small piece. I really look forward to listening to your roundtable talk with the Lantern Cast. It's always great fun when you guys get together and chat Green Lantern. It was another fun episode. It's great listening to your reviews of the early John's run. I haven't read those issues since they came out, and I forgot how great they were. I would also suggest Phil's suggestion of Williams as a writer of Green Lantern. I have been trade reading his Flash run and have really enjoyed it. Also been enjoying your Know the Core segments. They're a fun dive into some of the lesser known Green Lanterns. The severe lack of Green Lantern news can be tough, but at least we have the podcast and the great Blog of Oa community to bat things around and vent our hopes and frustrations. Thanks again for doing this. You add some fun and enjoyment to my day in brightest day. Daniel, thank you. That's something I needed to hear, especially right now. So I do really appreciate that. And I thank you for volunteering to come up with the idea of doing the book club. We have about 2,300 people in the Blog of Oa Facebook community. And by and large, it's been a great experience. Obviously, when you get that many fans together, you're going to have some disagreements. And we've had some people we've had to kick out before. But by and large, very well-behaved community, very supportive of each other. And Daniel came up with this idea of, hey, I'd like to do a book club. And I'm like, run with it, dude. I love it. I think that's great. I'm glad that there's a forum there that he can do that with. So I appreciate that. And we're going to get back to doing more of the John's run, probably our next episode. We had a little bit of a timeout, but we're going to be diving back into it again now that we finished the first arc. So hang tight.
I think Daniel's St. Walker, because he just gave you hope, man.
He did. He supercharged my ring.
I'm start calling Daniel St. Walker.
That's right.
And also, mad props, Daniel, to getting to reading the Flash stuff. I mean, Josh is great. Well, was great on the Flash's run. I tell you what, I read the first issue 763 came out this week. It was a different writer, and I hate to say it because this is a Green Lantern podcast, but like the art really sucked in it, and I was kind of depressed. But the story was a standalone, kind of segging into what they're doing with an arc, and it really was kind of cool what they did with it. And I won't get in depth with it, but I already can tell I'm going to miss Josh in that book. But I digress. So let's move on to our next guy. This is from Charlie. Charlie says, "Hey guys, I picked up my first ever Green Lantern story about 3 weeks ago, and it is the omnibus of John's run. I was so happy to see you guys just start reviewing it, and hopefully it will continue. Love hearing what you guys have to say, as well as it gives me a better understanding of what I'm reading. Thanks for the awesome show, and keep it up." Well, Charlie, you stepped into a whole new dimension, man. My friend Brian just read the John's omnibus, and he loved it. He said it was great. He had a great time reading it, and Brian was on our show. I mean, that was a long time ago, wasn't it, Myron?
Yeah.
And he's never really delved into Green Lantern before. He's a Marvel guy, big fan of X-Men stuff. He's a Nightcrawler guy, and I got him over to read Green Lantern, and I don't know if he's been reading the Morrison stuff, but he has been delving into past stuff like the Johns' run. He did the omnibus, and he showed me the book. It was huge, and he thoroughly enjoyed it. He said it was really worth his time reading it. So, Charlie, I'm glad you're liking it, man. It's good stuff.
I'm really jealous of the people that have not read the Johns' run and are just discovering it for the first time, because it was such an incredible ride. I mean, people have kind of downplayed the success of that run, because I do think after Blackest Night, Jeff Johns kind of struggled with where do I go now. But I think all the way through from the beginning, from Rebirth through Blackest Night, is to me still probably the best conceived and executed run of Green Lantern out of the entire history of the character. And I don't take that lightly, but some of the things that he did were just really, really good. Well thought out, well paced. There's such a sense of discovery. I can't praise it highly enough. So kudos to you for getting the omnibus. The downside is there's 2 more you got to get to finish the run.
Right. It's huge.
But money well spent, to be sure. So the last one we've got is from Marco 808, and this was a comment that came in via YouTube. And this was regarding the last episode. Basically, Marco says, "Another awesome segment, sirs. I always say this, but I honestly think back, Garth Ennis would be perfect for a Green Lantern book, Green Lantern Corps book for the Black Label line. He writes war stories like nobody else. Battlefield, and especially Sarah from TKO Studios, are just some of his awesome military graphic novel titles. He explores everything from PTSD, the tolls of emotional stress because of war, explores individuals' morals during conflict, lots of action, etc. I think introducing these types of concepts with the Green Lantern Corps as a whole would be epic. I think Guy Gardner would be perfect for the lead role for this title. I wouldn't mind reading a Mark Waid GL book, though. Absolutely loved Kingdom Come and a bunch of his 90s JLA titles. Tower of Babel. He lists his example. He thinks it's a Waid JLA title. Yeah. So I wouldn't mind jumping back into a GL series with Waid on the helm. Keep up the great work, fellas. Aloha from Hawaii.
Well, I mean, he makes a good point about a Garth Ennis title, but I think it would be better served if John Stewart was the lead on it, not Guy Gardner. Mainly because John Stewart's your military guy.
Yeah, you could see how that would be a logical fit. I could see Guy too, to a point. Maybe not through PTSD, but if they went back and revisited the relationship between him and his father and the long-lasting toll on him from that might be interesting. I mean,
that's a good point.
They kind of did that, but a modern retelling of that would be kind of interesting to revisit. I think any psychological examination of the characters would be very, very interesting, because I think in a lot of ways there's a lot more going on under the hood that we don't always see. And I think Guy is one of those characters where if you don't know what he's gone through, he can come off being kind of a jerk. But when you understand what he's gone through, you can kind of understand where he's coming from.
You sympathize with him.
Yeah, to a point. And I think Hal is the same way too. We don't often see what goes on under the hood. We often see the impulsive nature of the character, but what's sometimes missing is the fact that it's not really impulsive. But Hal, as a trained pilot, he processes things like a high performance athlete does. They can make split second decisions, and sometimes it's from the gut. But there's what's interesting is it's that faith in that the decision he makes, he knows he's going to make work. It's that confidence in himself. And I find those kind of things more interesting than some of the other things where we kind of do. It's not going to sound right. I know it, but I'm going to say it anyway. I think sometimes we get into too much into this. Well, they have to have the exact same challenges I have or I can't relate to them.
Yeah, that's cliche.
Yeah, and I don't. Nobody's gonna. We've talked about my health challenges and my birth defect and all that stuff in the past, and I don't want to regurgitate it here. But I'm not. I know I'm not going to find a character that's gone through what I've gone through, but I'm intellectual enough to be able to relate to somebody else and find things in that character that I translate. You know what I mean? So I don't need somebody that's so specific to a point that it becomes unrelatable to the masses, if that makes sense.
Sure.
So I love the idea of taking characters like that and kind of getting into their psyches. I mean, one of the stories that I really, really loved, one of the best single issues I've read of Green Lantern in probably the last 10 years, is that Tom King Darkseid War one-shot.
Man, it's been a while since I read that one.
It was really good. It focused a little bit on Hal as a young boy struggling with the death of his father and why was it allowed to happen, and his mother's making him go to a church, and he runs into Hal as the god of light. He's been given those powers through the Darkseid War, and so you've got the adult Hal talking to the young Hal, and the adult Hal knows exactly what Hal's been going through. But he talks about faith and religion and those kind of things, because young Hal is mad at God for allowing things to happen to his father.
Interesting.
Just a neat story. I'm not a religious person, to be quite honest, but I thought the story was really interesting. It explored Hal in a way that hadn't been done before.
What did you think of his comment about Mark Waid on a Green Lantern book? I think you and I talked about that, didn't we?
We talked about it. I think Mark Waid's best writing days are behind him, to be honest. I'm not a big fan of him. At one time, I loved his Flash run. I did not care for his JLA Year One, and I didn't really care for his Brave and the Bold Flash Green Lantern miniseries that much. And I know I struggle with his antics off the page. Some of the things that he's done to other creators, some of his activities. I don't want to go into all the details, but there's a lot of temper tantrum issues and misbehaving issues, and I mean he's still stuck in a lawsuit with the one guy that tried to create his own comic book, and he got himself involved in it because he thought he was going to shut the guy down by interfering in the publication of his indie book, that kind of thing. And again, I don't want to bring up all that stuff, but I just felt that, I don't know. I don't know if I could get behind it. I'd have to see what he's going to do.
You know what I'd like to see before we leave the segment for our listener feedback? It's a book that included not only Guy Gardner, not only Arkillo, but also Lobo. What about those three?
That would be interesting. Those guys like on a road trip.
Oh man, that would be awesome to read. Oh my gosh. I would love it. I would love every second of reading that.
That would be a lot of fun. It really would.
It would be. It would be good times.
I'd love to see that on the Green Lantern HBO show. Because you got 2/3 of the characters right there.
Oh man, that would just be so much fun. I mean, I've always enjoyed that relationship between Arkillo and Guy Gardner. But if you throw Lobo in that mix, I mean, and any kind of version of Lobo works. Besides that new version they came out with during, I don't know if that was New 52 or not, but the Lobo is just he's just a cool character. And I think it would just really mesh well with those two. It would be just like this lover's triangle that you've never seen before in comic book history. Oh, man.
All right, my friend. Well, this has been a long episode, so rather than break and come back for a closing, why don't we wrap it up?
Right.
For you and I, it's we've been recording for almost 2 hours, so let's wrap it up, and we'll be back in a couple of weeks. We'll probably be doing the next issue of the Jeff Johns series, and go over stuff there. Maybe we'll have some more news to share.
Okay.
But until next time, keep your power ring charged, be good to each other, and make every day your brightest day.
All right, we'll see you back here soon.
The Podcast of OA is the official podcast of the blog of OA and a proud member of the Comics Podcast Network. Share your comments and questions by calling the show's voicemail line at 406-POD-OA. That's 406-763-6362. You can send your emails to podcast@blogofoa.com. You can also find the Blog of OA and the Podcast of OA on Twitter and Facebook. Green Lantern and other related characters are the copyrighted property of DC Comics Incorporated and are used without permission. The Blog of OA and the Podcast of OA are fan productions and do not claim any ownership over the Green Lantern or any other copyrighted properties.